everybody. I'm sitting in Andy's truck for this week's Discovery Team update because there are people in my house and they are noisy because for some reason remote learning also requires noise. So that's why I'm out here enjoying the sunshine a little bit because it's a nice day out, and here's your Discovery Team update. First of all, so much gratitude to everybody who filled out the Peak profile. If you remember, our goal was 80% of the people who received it would fill it out. And guys, we got to 73%, which is actually really, really great. And it's great. Thank you so much. Give yourselves a round of applause. Job well done. Yay! Now, the next step, as far as the Peak profile is concerned, is we will meet with our district superintendent and Alan Rathbun, who was here over the summer, if you met him when he came to our church service the 1 week. And they will be meeting with us on December 21st, and they will be talking to us about moving forward, talk to us about the results of the Peak profile, just discussing all of it and analyzing it with us. And we're looking forward to that because we'll be able to ask a lot of questions about moving forward, about how does this apply to our church specifically and kind of where we're at and what we're doing. And we're really excited that they're coming, really excited to meet with them and looking forward to that. So remember, that's December 21st. And if you could remember to keep us in prayer, that would be fantastic. We are all depending on the Lord to guide and lead and just show up and, answer all the questions. So please continue to persevere in prayer for us and with us, and we will do the same. The other thing I wanted to just remind you of is when, on Sunday, Wade talked about the big give of Center Church. So we've given away a lot of money this year, and we're just so grateful to be able to do that. It's a beautiful thing, and it's actually really exciting. And we want to end the year with one more big give. We want to give away $13,500 to specific ministries or needs and individuals in our church who are in need. And in order to do that, we need $5,500 more. So if you would like to give towards that $5,500 towards this big give to end the year with this big give, go to centerchurch.org/give, and you can give there. I'm sure if you want to send a check, you can definitely do that. Talk to, Angie or Steph or, one of the elders or Jared or somebody, and I'm sure you can give a check too if that's how you would prefer to give. But we want to end the year with this big give, and if we all gave a little something, that $5,500 shouldn't be too hard for us to reach. So keep that in your mind, put it on your to-do list and pray about it, and let's give and end with this big give.
Hey Center Church, good to be with you guys today. Coming to you from my house today. A couple weeks ago, Tom Sperlich made the comment that he said Jared has been shooting from a lot of idyllic locations. I was standing next to Kevin Raymond when he made that comment, and Kevin turned to me and he said, that might be the only time that anybody's ever used your name and idyllic in the same sentence. So thanks for that boost of confidence there, Kevin. No, I love Kevin. He has a lot of great things. He usually has a lot of great things to say in our microchurch, except for that one, of course. But so I love microchurch. I hope you guys do too. We're kind of wrapping up our Francis Chan Letters to the Church series today. Not only I'm not shooting from outside, but we're going to mix it up how we start today. Going to do something a little different. I'm going to ask you to pause the video in just a minute and take just a couple of minutes, not a long time, but take it just a couple of minutes and talk about this question. What are some responsibilities we have as Christians? What are we responsible to do? What are some things that have been asked of us that we need to accomplish? Maybe we've learned from the last couple of weeks, or maybe they haven't been mentioned yet, but what are our responsibilities? Just take 3 or 4 minutes because you're going to have discussion time at the end too, so don't take a lot of time. The other thing I would like you to do is to read the passages we're going to look at today. And so we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 16 and chapter 17. So 3 or 4 minutes, discuss the discussion question, then take some time, maybe have a couple different people split it up, but read 1 Samuel chapter 16 and chapter 17. And then when you do, come right back here. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, pause your video, and I'll see you in a minute. All right, welcome back. I I didn't actually go get a coffee. I already had it sitting here. I just kind of walked off screen for effect. But you don't know that because you paused the video. You could have done anything. I could have gone to Walmart in that time, unless you didn't pause the video, and you'll know that was just about 3 seconds of time. But anyway, so we're wrapping up Letters to the Church today. We do a thing at Grace Prep called Family Chapel once a month. Bob or Dana Gresh come in and speak. And what they said in the November chapel has just really stuck with me. It was right before the election, and they both made a couple comments that I've just kind of not, they've just stuck with me. They've been mulling over my head, and so it's kind of where I want to start our message today. Again, it was the Friday before the election, and Dana said this. She said, if someone is watching how I walk through the next couple of weeks, I want them to say that I walked with honor. And I thought about that. I can see a lot of people that aren't walking with honor through this time, Christians and non-Christians alike. Our election this year was a world debate. It's very divisive. It's causing people to do and say things they wouldn't normally do and say. And so I thought Dana had a great point of just, hey, we as Christians have a responsibility to walk with honor through elections that are divisive, through global pandemics, through Walmart with a mask on. Or, we need to respect people. And so we want to talk a lot about our rights. I'm going to get into that today. But we need to walk with honor because we represent Christ. Bob kind of wrapped up that chapel with a little challenge for the students. And he talked about the timing of leadership, that leadership has timing, that as leaders, there are times that we need to step up. And, of course, there's times also we need to follow. And we need to sort out the difference. But he said this. He said, remember the timing of leadership. And so I'm going to kind of run with those today. I'm titling this message, Carry the Cheese. Now, since you've read the passages, you may know where I'm going with that, but I have a subtitle too. It says this. It says, almost everything you need to know to be successful in life can be learned from Andrew Summers. That's right, Andrew Summers. Well, what do you know about Andrew Summers? Do you know when he was born? When do you think he was born? Throw out a couple dates. Were you in the 2000s? Are you in the 1900s? What do you think? Andrew Summers. Here, let me give you a little bio on Andrew Summers. Andrew Summers Rowan was born April 23rd, 1857 in Gap Mills, Virginia, the son of John M. Rowan and Virginia Summers. He was an American Army officer who served in the Spanish-American War, the Philippine War, the Moor Rebellion, and became famous for reportedly delivering a message to General Calixto Garcia in Cuba. A Message to Garcia is a widely distributed essay written by Elbert Hubbard in 1899 expressing the value of individual initiative and conscientiousness in work. The essay tells the story of a daring escapade performed by an American soldier, First Lieutenant Andrew S. Rowan, just prior to the Spanish-American War. The essay describes Rowan carrying a message from President William McKinley to General Calixto Garcia, a leader in the Cuban insurgents somewhere in the mountains of the vastness of Cuba. No one knew where. The essay contrasts Rowan's self-driven effort against the imbecility of the average man, the inability or unwillingness to concentrate on a thing and do it. Hubbard writes, the point I wish to make is this. McKinley gave Rowan a letter to be delivered to Garcia. Rowan took the letter and did not ask, where is he at? By the Eternal, there is a man whose form should be cast in deathless bronze and statue placed in every college in the land. It is not book learning young men need, nor instructions about this or that, but a stiffening of the vertebrae which will cause them to be loyal to a trust, to act promptly, concentrate their energies, do a thing, carry the message to Garcia. I would encourage you to take some time later, Google A Message to Garcia, look up that essay. There's also a couple of videos on YouTube that actually someone reads out or speaks the essay, but it's a life-changing essay just about getting things done, not making excuses, not putting it off to somebody else. And so I want to talk a little bit before we get into our scriptures about entitlement. You see, I feel like we live in a very entitled time. We live in an entitled nation. There is a lot of talk about our rights. Simple little things like our right to wear a mask or not wear a mask. It's silly. I feel like we live in a very entitled town. We think that just because we have a degree that we are entitled to a nice salary. We live in a very entitled time. Social media tells us that if we have an opinion, we're entitled to share it, whether it's based in truth or not, whether it's hurtful or not. We're entitled to free speech, even when that speech may hurt or maybe just flat out a lie. It translates to every level of society. Our teenager, like, I'm 16, I'm entitled to drive a car. Just every level of our society at some point seems to feel like they're entitled to something. So I want to say this. When I make the decision to follow Christ, I am promised forgiveness for my failures and an eternity with Him. The only thing that I'm really entitled to is a life of the opportunity a life of opportunity to love and serve others. That's really in this life. That's what I'm promised to. I'm promised that I have an opportunity. God promised. He doesn't promise me that it will all be easy. He doesn't promise me that I won't go through suffering or hard times. But He does promise me that He'll walk through those times with me. So I'm entitled to a life with Him here and a life with Him for eternity. But as far as my rights, I really don't have a lot in this life. I want to look at King David, because King David was someone who could live a life living as a very entitled person, that he has a lot of rights or he has a lot of things that he's entitled to, but he really didn't. King David never really acted entitled. So let's look at his life. King David was likely born in Bethlehem around the year 1040 to 1030 BC. Okay, so he's born kind of that time period. At the age of about 10 to 13, he is anointed by Samuel to be the next king. Now here's the way that goes. The prophet calls up Jesse. He says, hey, I'm coming over to your house. I'm going to anoint one of your sons the next king. And so get them together. Get everybody dressed up. Put their best clothes on. Get their Sunday best. Because we're going to come over and we're going to locate the next king who's going to follow Saul, and we're going to anoint them. So catch this in verses 6 and 7. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance nor his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Samuel comes over. He's a prophet of God. He's carrying the message of God, who's going to be the next king, and he looks at the outward appearance. So this very spiritual man, even he looks at the outward appearance and says, wow, look at this dude. He is built. He is shaped. He is ready. He's mature. He is ready to be the next king. And God says, nah, I'm not really looking at that. In fact, he says, don't consider his looks, because I've rejected him. That's what the Bible says about David in this moment. He's like, I've rejected him. I'm like, I feel like that some days. I feel like, God, hey, you forgot this part of me. I've been rejected. Now, as you read on in the passage, you saw that David had other attributes that were very attractive. But in this case, when it came to stature, Samuel said, God says I've rejected him. So now here's the interesting thing. Samuel goes down through the sons that Jesse had put out, and it says this. He says this, Samuel asked Jesse in verse 11, are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered. He is tending the sheep. Samuel said, send for him, and he will not sit down. We will not sit down till you rise. Now think about that for a second. If you are David and your dad, you have all these older siblings, and the prophet is coming over and he's like, hey, we're going to pick the next king. And your dad doesn't even invite you to the party. He's like, hey, you go take care of the animals while we take care of some important business. That's a father wound right there off the bat, right? You know what? David was entitled to be at that party. He was entitled to be there, but he wasn't selected. But when he shows up, he doesn't kind of act like that. God says, hey, this is the one. This is the one I've chosen. It says in verse 13, so Samuel took the horn of the oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David, and he became king in that moment, moving forward, and lived happily ever after. Well, if you're following along, you know that's not how it went. It kind of ends with, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. But he didn't become king. He didn't become king that day, that week, actually for a couple decades, as we'll look at in a minute. You know what he does next? After being anointed the next leader of God's chosen people, do you know what he does next? He goes back to tending the sheep. He goes back out to watch over the sheep. Now, as you read before we started today, Saul's tormented by an evil spirit, and David is enlisted into the king's servant, kind of playing some instruments to help the king. So he enters that job. Now we're going to pick up the story a few years later when David is approximately 15 to 17 years old. And this is 1 Samuel 17, verses 13 through 15. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul. But catch this, verse 15. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. This is a couple years later, okay? This is a couple years later after he's been listed in the king's service. And it says David is working for now imagine, the president calls up, hey, I need you to come over and work for me, or I need your son or daughter to come over and work for me in the White House. What are you going to do about their chores? What are you going to do about the things they're supposed to do around the house? Teenagers, you're going to be like, hey, peace out, right? I'm going to work for the president. Well, in this case, David, as he's enlisted in the service of the king in the palace, continues to return to his father's house and tend the sheep. He landed a job with the king, but he still did his chores at home. Isn't that phenomenal? His servant heart has just continued to follow, be about his responsibilities. He's entitled to stay in the palace, work for the king. He doesn't have to go home, but he does. Picking up in verse 17 of chapter 17. Now Jesse said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back assurance for him. So David's working for the king, going home and taking care of the sheep. And now his dad says, hey, your brothers are off doing the real business of fighting a war, defending the country, and I want you to take them lunch and take some cheese for their commanders. Isn't that interesting? You know what David does? He does. He packs up the bread, he packs up the cheese, he takes it to the commander, and he shows up at the battle. Now you know the story. You read it. There's this giant. He's over 9 feet tall. He's taunting all the armies of Israel. No one's willing to fight him. David's like, hey, what's going on here? You know, now David's just doing his daily chores, taking lunch to his brothers, taking cheese to their boss. And he's like, hey, what's going on here? And he said, you know what? There's an opportunity here. Everybody's afraid of this guy, but I'm not. I can take him on. And as you read, he proceeds to go and take on Goliath and kill him and take him out. They thought he was crazy. They tried to put armor on him. He's like, I got it with these smooth stones. I'm going to do it. You see, he remembered the timing of leadership. He had been just kind of going through his life for several years after being anointed king, and he remembered the timing of leadership. And when the opportunity arose, he took down Goliath and saved Israel. And he became king. No, he didn't. He did not become king yet. In fact, it was not for several years later, at the age of 30. So he has gone 2 to 3 decades from the time he was anointed. A decade and a half after he kills Goliath, and he is a finally anointed king. In his book, A Tale of Three Kings, Gene Edwards writes, he's telling a story about David's response to Saul, David's response to his son Absalom when he tries to overthrow him. And he says this about the day that Samuel anointed David. He said, on that day, David was enrolled, not into the lineage of royalty, but into the school of brokenness. In the school of brokenness. When David was anointed at 10 to 13 years old, he was enrolled in the school of brokenness. He didn't become king. During the next 2.5 decades, he went right back to tending sheep. And then he worked for the king. He went in the king's service. And then the king gets jealous. The king tries to kill him, throws a spear at him, tries to pin him to the wall. David doesn't pick up that spear and throw him back. No, he takes off. The king chases him all over the countryside. David is hiding and living in caves. David has the opportunity to kill the king at one point, kill King Saul at one point, and he doesn't, because he's like, I'm not going to lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Mind you, this is the guy that if he does kill King Saul, he's entitled to be king. He could have done. He has every right to defend himself, but he doesn't. He doesn't take things into his own hands. He just said, God, I am going to trust you. I'm going to carry the cheese day by day, doing the daily business, and when the opportunities arise, I'll take them. And so that's what he does. He quietly trusts God and carries the cheese. Life-changing opportunities most often come in the form of the opportunity to serve others. And that's what David did. He served his family by taking care of the sheep. He served his father. He served his brothers by taking them food. He served the king when he needed it. I had this saying in leadership class I teach them, the opportunity of a lifetime has to be seized within the lifetime of the opportunity. God presents us these. Given the opportunity, Rowan carried the message to Garcia. He didn't ask where he was. He didn't ask how he was going to do it. He didn't come up with a million excuses or reasons why he couldn't do it. He just carried the message to Garcia. Given the opportunity, Noah carried wood for 100 years to build an ark in a world in which it had never rained. Imagine that. Noah just did it. He was given an opportunity and he seized it. Given the opportunity, Rebecca carried water for camels. She's literally just going to get water for her family. An opportunity arises, she carries waters, and in doing so, she becomes the great grandmother of Jesus. She seized the moment. She remembered the timing of leadership. She carried the cheese. She got it done. And given the opportunity, David carried the cheese and killed Goliath. We have responsibility, folks, to carry the cheese. We've talked a lot about over the last several weeks as we've gone through the letters of the church, that the responsibility of the church, which isn't a building or place, it's a body of believers, and our responsibility is it's on all of us to carry the cheese. It isn't on the worship team or a pastor or a handful of people. It's on all of us to step up. It's on all of us to seize the opportunities that we're given. You know, we had an interesting discussion in our DC group this past week. Someone had mentioned, had kind of referred to Bob and I as being on the front lines of ministry because of pure freedom and me working with the church. And Bob and I talked about that afterwards. We're like, we're not on the front lines. It's all of us as believers. You know, it's not the people that are in ministry that are on the front lines. It's all of us, especially if we're working in a secular place or going to a secular school. Or you're on the front lines of ministry. You're right there. And so our job as leaders in the church is to equip you to do the work of the ministry. And it's because we are the church. We all have gifts and abilities. And so as we kind of wrap up letters to the church, if you miss everything else, I want you to catch that, is that you have a role to play. You have been given some cheese to carry. Will you carry it? Will you take the message to Garcia? You know, one final thought I have. You don't have to be a Christian to carry the cheese. You don't have to be a Christian to love and serve others. So what makes us different? What makes us different is hope. One of the major things that's different is that we have hope. We are entitled to hope. God says, when you're facing giants, when you're facing storms, when life is hard, there's hope that at the end of the story, there's hope that you're going to have an eternity with me. And there's hope that I'll walk through those things with you. God is not kind of sending us off on our own to face the giants. David said this. He's like, you come at me with a spear and a sword, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. David knew that the God Almighty who had created the universe was with him when he faced the giants, when he faced the bears, when he faced the lions that wanted to take the sheep. And so God will walk through those things with you. We have a hope, and we have a responsibility to carry that hope to the people around us who don't have it. God put us at just the right time in history, at just the right place, with the right group of people to share the hope that we have. He gives us opportunity in these moments to share that hope. And he is with us. He's doing it with us. Francis Chan said this. He said, if I could go back and talk to 25-year-old Francis Chan, I would tell him, know God, don't just serve him. The last several weeks, we've talked a lot about serving, but it's not just for the sake of serving. It's to engage with God into what he's doing. It's engage with him, know him, walk through life with him. Chan says, know God, don't just serve him. He says this, and I'll leave you with this. He says, you're going to face God soon. The wisest decisions you can make are the ones with that final moment in mind. We're going to face God. And so when I look at the end of my life, What do I want to look back and say that I accomplished? What do I want people to say about me? I want them to say, like God testified about David in Acts chapter 13. He says, when David had fallen asleep, he served God's purpose in his generation. He served God's purpose. I want God to say that I was a man after his own heart because I did everything I asked him to do, because he doesn't leave me alone to do it. So I want to encourage you, church, carry the cheese. Take the message to Garcia. Give this world, who is obviously in dire need of hope right now. We live in our community. People are fearful. They are scared. They're worried. They're worried about a disease or a virus that they don't understand. They're worried about their jobs. We live in a world where hope is desperately needed all around us, and we have that hope. And so look around and share that with those around you. Say, God, who are you engaging with, and where can I engage with you? Carry the message to Garcia. Carry the cheese. Thanks, guys.